Today, NASCAR unveiled the new 2022 NASCAR Next Gen Cup car. It's a brand new car that will make its debut in the 2022 Speed Weeks, specifically the Busch Class and the 2022 Daytona 500. There's been tons of photos, and yes, there's going to be a ton of cool video clips, photos, and imagery of these new Cup cars, specifically the Chevrolet Camaro, the Ford Mustang, and the Toyota Camry for the 2022 Cup Series. But we're going to focus not only on the car designs themselves and why they look cool and why they might be kind of stupid looking, but also going to break down what is new on these Cup cars for 2022. With the Cup car that's currently racing in the Cup Series, NASCAR gave the manufacturers a lot more leeway with the bodies and really allowed them to bring in their own personalized nose and tail sections in order to better identify these Cup cars as Chevrolets, Fords, and Toyotas. In 2022, that goes to another level. The next-gen car has given manufacturers greater opportunities and latitude to incorporate the features into the brand new race body that better replicate the look and feel of a street car. The new sleek design actually lowers the greenhouse. That's right, it brings the roof line down a little bit and gives it a little bit more of a sleeker street car look to these Cup cars, while shortening the deck lid and widening the actual car, giving it more of a coupe look, which is more stock than anything. You look at all three of these manufacturers' cars, and all three of them look a lot more similar to their street car counterparts. The bodies of these new cars will actually reduce aerodynamic force and put the emphasis back on the actual setup and driver control of these vehicles. Plus, they're made out of a new composite material that is more durable and will allow more beating and banging without the loss of performance. In other words, if you sideswipe someone, you're not going to see their car suddenly go away because, aero push or anything like that. Supposedly, that's fixed. There's brand new 18-inch forged aluminum wheels underneath these cars with a wider Goodyear tire that better replicate what's found in a passenger car and will allow for softer tire components. Also, the specs of the actual race car have been updated to match modern passenger car vehicle technology, including independent rear suspension, rack and pinion steering, and larger brakes for these Cup cars. A new transaxle will actually combine the transmission and rear gears into one package with an eye on the future. The ability to incorporate electrification down the road, maybe? I don't know. The bottom of the car is sealed with an underwing and a rear diffuser that'll actually help handling in traffic and reduce the quote-unquote dirty air. You look at the hoods of these cars, they actually have hoof louvers that will allow teams to maximize engine performance independent of aerodynamics. And all of this is sitting on a brand new redesigned chassis, which features new front and new rear bumpers for increased safety. Both the front and rear clips bolt onto the center section for easier serviceability and damage repair. This means that potentially we could actually see these guys simply remove the rear end or the front end in the event of a catastrophic crash. In this one, I'm interested to see how it actually plays out. The upgraded car connectivity will allow for an in-car camera in every vehicle, with the ability to bring fans more real-life data in the future. In other words, we could see 40 in-car cameras plus every single week for each of your favorite drivers. This is a very expensive process, and if NASCAR found a way to streamline this for 2022, this is huge. NASCAR quite literally found a new gear, adding a 5-speed manual sequential with ramp and plate differential transaxle. In other words, 5-speed transmission instead of 4, which means literally we're shifting into a new gear. And if you want to read up on the specific specs and the specific manufacturers of each of the components for these cars, you can actually check the link in the description on AmericanRacingNetwork.com for a full rundown on all the specs and a ton of new photos. Here's what I like. I like the fact that they actually look like street cars. I look at the back of this Camry and it actually looks like my buddy's Camry. It really does. He has a 2020 Camry and it looks exactly like this 2022 Camry. You put them side by side, which, by the way, the manufacturers did, and they're pretty darn close. Yeah, they're never going to be exactly perfect, but they're extraordinarily close now. And I think it's up to the actual Cup teams to put a respectable paint job on these things that actually looks good. I know NASCAR Cup teams have been wrapping their cars for years, but I think it's really up to the teams themselves, and maybe even NASCAR, to help regulate where you can and where you cannot put graphics and sponsors. And that leads into another point about all this. Where are the numbers going to be in 2022? NASCAR's been tinkering this, to say the very least, and NASCAR President Steve Felt said after the unveiling of the next-gen car that they're still figuring it out, admittingly. NASCAR experimented with moving the car numbers closer to the rear wheels in last year's All-Star race out at the Bristol Motor Speedway. And teams are actually also studying the matter independently, and so far there's no real consensus if we keep the numbers centered on the door or we move them to the rear like we saw in the All-Star race last year. Personally, I hope to see the numbers stay where they are, dead center on the side panels of these cars. I hate to be a traditionalist, but it's tradition. It's been like that for years, and here's my thing. If we move these numbers pretty much anywhere else, it's not going to give more space. Not really for sponsors. It's just a question of how big do you get a sponsor's logo on a car. And you look at certain paint schemes that have come out in 2021, I don't think having more space for these sponsors is necessarily a good thing. There's already a ton of space on the side of these cars. You just have to actually create a graphics package and a sponsor logo package that actually work on these cars. Take Joe Gibbs Racing, for example. Martin Truex Jr. has a completely crowded car. I don't care what anybody tells me, the 2021 number 19 Bass Pro Shops Toyota is absolutely a walking billboard. You couldn't get another sticker on that thing if you tried. And I think it's oversaturated. The number gets lost with all the sponsor logos. And it's a prime example of you can do a lot with the space that's there. On the flip side of that, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and his team announced the paint scheme for this weekend out at Darlington for the Throwback Weekend. And Tide has an extraordinarily small, minimalistic paint scheme with tons of room for other logos. There could have been a really cool graphics package and an actual legitimate throwback paint scheme as opposed to just kind of, sort of saying it's a throwback paint scheme. But no, the team and the sponsors didn't utilize the full space available on the side of this Cup car. These are just two extreme examples of too much and too little. There's a happy medium somewhere. You know who does have a happy medium? Stewart-Haas Racing. More specifically, Kevin Harvick. His team have done incredible things, specifically with the Busch Beer paint schemes all throughout 2020, and they're continuing to do it in 2021. I think that that's what NASCAR needs to look at as a good example of what you can do with the space on these Cup cars. Now, looking at the cars themselves, yeah, they look absolutely amazing. I'm disappointed we're going to have to wait until next February to see these things hit the track. Personally, I would like to see these cars hit the track in the All-Star race. NASCAR's really excited for this, so are the fans, and why not go ahead and debut this car out at the Texas Motor Speedway for the All-Star race? It's NASCAR's bread and butter, mile and a halves, and to put this car on a mile and a half track as its debut makes sense. And yeah, I guess we're going to see that next year on the road course at Daytona for the Busch Clash, but I'd like to see it a whole hell of a lot sooner. Originally, the car was supposed to come out in 2021, but because of the pandemic, NASCAR pushed it back because they wanted to make sure they had their ducks in a row on this. I'm excited because ultimately it means this car is going to help level the playing field. I know we've been saying that for a while now. What does that actually mean, and why does this car do that? Currently, NASCAR Cup cars are built in-house, more or less. There's outside vendors that Cup teams purchase parts for and then put them on the cars, but for the most part, a lot of the cars themselves are manufactured in-house, and it comes down to who makes a better car. This is going to take a lot of that away with actual licensed vendors through NASCAR that you can buy components from. In other words, smaller teams are buying the exact same components that the bigger teams are going to use, and vice versa. Meaning, in theory, the playing field is leveled. It doesn't come down to who builds the best car, to who puts more hours in the wind tunnel, who puts more money into testing or development. It comes down to who sets up the car with the better handling setup. Who's the better driver is what it ultimately comes down to. And yes, whoever has the most money and puts the most into these cars will always be somewhat of a factor, But this is NASCAR taking a step away from that and making it so that the smaller teams, underfunded teams, can still go out there and have a decent shot at a top 10, if not a top 5 or a win, which is a great thing. In other words, think the restrictor plate randomness of who's running in the top 10 and who's contending for a win every single week. Mile and a halfs, road course, short tracks, no matter what, we're going to have that same level of randomization. At least that's the hope for NASCAR. Ultimately, with a new in-car camera in every vehicle, independent rear suspension, rack and pinion steering, a new sequential gearbox, and bigger brakes, this is more modern street car technology. It's taking NASCAR not necessarily into the future, but bringing it into 2021, which is what the stock car was always supposed to be. And yeah, I'm sure NASCAR will continue to add and change and develop this car for years to come, but I think this is a great place to start. But now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about the brand new NASCAR Next Gen 2022 Cup car? Do you like the new stylings? Do you think it's stupid? Do you think they look a whole heck of a lot better than the old COT unveil? Personally, I think so too. Go ahead and leave it in the comments down below, and while you're there, mash that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up on this video, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and family to help grow the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Alan Bailey. We'll see ya at the track.